You know that moment when your entire life changes in the span of 30 seconds? When everything you thought you knew about yourself gets turned upside down by a stranger's eyes? I never believed in fate until I met him. But maybe I should start from the beginning, because this story, well, it's not the kind of love story they write in fairy tales. My name is Emma, and 3 months ago, I was exactly where I thought I belonged, in my corner office on the 23rd floor of a Manhattan marketing firm, wearing designer heels that cost more than some people's rent, and planning campaigns for clients whose names you'd recognize from billboards. I had it all figured out, or so I thought. My life was a perfectly curated Instagram feed of success, ambition, and metropolitan sophistication. The irony is that the story that would unravel everything started with a lie. My best friend Sarah had been begging me for months to visit her family's vacation home upstate. "You need to disconnect, Em," she'd say, watching me answer emails at 2 a.m. "When's the last time you saw actual stars? Not the ones on your phone screen." I kept making excuses until my therapist, yes, I had one of those too, suggested that maybe constant work wasn't a healthy coping mechanism for my recent breakup with Marcus, my investment banker ex who'd cheated on me with his secretary. How original, right? So there I was, driving my BMW up winding country roads, cursing my GPS for taking me through what felt like the middle of nowhere. That's when it happened. The moment that would change everything. My car started making this horrible grinding noise. Smoke began pouring from under the hood, and I found myself stranded on a dirt road with no cell service, wearing a white sundress and heels that were definitely not made for walking. I was standing there, probably looking like a lost Vogue model in a cornfield, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and... God, how do I even describe that first moment I saw him? Ethan was everything I thought I didn't want in a man. Tall, yes, but in that lean, work-hardened way that comes from actual physical labor, not a gym membership. His hands were dirty, actually dirty, with soil under his fingernails. He wore faded jeans with holes that weren't fashionable, just worn, and a plain gray t-shirt that had seen better days. But his eyes were this incredible deep green, like the forest after rain. And when he looked at me, I felt like he could see straight through all my carefully constructed moles. "Car trouble?" he asked, and his voice was warm honey with just a hint of amusement. Not mocking, exactly, but like he was trying not to smile at the sight of me so obviously out of place. "Something like that," I managed, suddenly self-conscious about how ridiculous I must look. "My phone has no service, and I have no idea where I am." "You're about 5 miles from Miller's Creek," he said, walking over to my car. "Mind if I take a look?" I nodded, watching as he popped the hood and peered inside. The way he moved was so confident, so sure of himself in this environment that was completely foreign to me. After a few minutes, he straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag he'd pulled from his back pocket. "Your radiator's blown," he said. "You're not driving anywhere today." My heart sank. "Is there a rental car place nearby? Or a hotel?" He actually smiled then, and I felt something flutter in my chest that I definitely hadn't expected. This isn't exactly Manhattan. City girl. Nearest rental place is about 60 miles south. But... Paused, studying my face. Can give you a ride to town. Jenny at the diner knows everyone. She'll figure something out. Something about the way he said city girl should have annoyed me. Instead, it made me want to prove I was more than just my designer clothes and manicured nails. I'd appreciate that, I said. His truck was exactly what you'd expect. An old Ford pickup with a bench seat covered in a Mexican blanket and a slight smell of hay and motor oil. But as we drove down those winding roads, with him pointing out landmarks and telling me stories about the area, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in months. So, what brings a Manhattan marketing executive to the middle of nowhere? He asked. And I was surprised he'd pegged my profession so accurately. How did you know what I do? The way you hold yourself. The way you checked your phone 6 times in the first 10 minutes. Even though I told you there's no service. The heels, he glanced over at me. Plus, you have that look. What look? Like you're used to being the smartest person in the room. I should have been offended, but something about his tone told me he wasn't trying to insult me. And you, I asked, what do you do when you're not rescuing stranded city girls? I farm, he said simply. Mostly organic vegetables, some livestock. Been in my family for 3 generations. The way he said it, with such quiet pride, made me realize how differently we saw the world. In my circles, success was measured in salary figures and job titles. But there was something in his voice when he talked about his land that spoke of a different kind of wealth entirely. Jenny's diner turned out to be exactly what central casting would order for small-town restaurant. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and the kind of pie case that made you forget about your diet. Jenny herself was a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and the kind of smile that made you feel like family. Well, look what the cat dragged in, she said when Ethan walked in with me trailing behind. And who's this pretty thing? Emma, Ethan said. Her car broke down on Miller Road. Needs a place to stay while it gets fixed. Jenny looked me up and down, taking in my designer dress and completely impractical shoes. Honey, you are about as far from Kansas as Dorothy ever was. But her eyes were kind. Lucky for you, my nephew Jake runs the auto shop. Unlucky for you, he's gone fishing until Monday. Monday. Oh, it was Friday afternoon. Is there a hotel? I asked hopefully. Jenny laughed. Sweetie, this town has 1 stoplight and no hotel. But... She glanced at Ethan meaningfully. The Anderson place has that guest room. I saw something pass between them. Some kind of silent communication that I wasn't privy to. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. I couldn't impose, I said quickly. It's no imposition, Ethan said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. My grandmother always said the guest room was for people who needed it. And that's how I found myself following Ethan's pickup truck down another dirt road to what turned out to be one of the most beautiful properties I'd ever seen. The farmhouse was old but well maintained, with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that looked like something out of a magazine. Gardens stretched out in neat rows behind the house, and in the distance, I could see pastures where horses grazed peacefully. It's beautiful, I said, as we got out of the vehicles, and I meant it. Thanks, he said, and I caught a hint of surprise in his voice, like he hadn't expected me to appreciate it. Been in the family since 1952. My grandfather built most of it himself. The inside was just as charming. Hardwood floors polished to a soft glow, furniture that looked comfortable rather than fashionable, and family photos covering nearly every surface. It felt like a home in a way my minimalist Manhattan apartment never had. "The guest room's upstairs," Ethan said, leading me up a staircase lined with more family photos. "Bathroom's right across the hall. I'll try to find you something more practical to wear." The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a handmade quilt on the bed and windows that looked out over the gardens. After Ethan left me alone to get settled, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what was happening. 48 hours ago, my biggest concern had been whether to approve the campaign mock-ups for a luxury watch brand. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, staying with a farmer whose last name I didn't even know yet. I should have been panicking, should have been making calls, demanding solutions, finding a way back to my real life. Instead, I found myself looking out that window at the way the late afternoon light hit the vegetable gardens, and feeling more peaceful than I had in months. There was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," I called. Ethan entered carrying a stack of clothes. "These might fit," he said, setting them on the dresser. "They belong to my sister. She's about your size." "Your sister?" "She moved to California a few years ago, married a doctor." There was something in his voice, maybe regret or loneliness, but it was gone before I could identify it clearly. The clothes turned out to be jeans, a soft cotton t-shirt, and even a pair of sneakers that were only slightly too big. When I came downstairs wearing them, Ethan did a double take. "Better?" I asked, doing a little spin. "Different," he said, and there was something in his eyes that made my pulse quicken. "You look more like yourself." It was a strange thing to say to someone he'd known for all of 4 hours, but somehow I knew exactly what he meant. In those borrowed clothes, in this place so far removed from my usual world, I did feel more like myself, or maybe like a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I was planning to make dinner." I followed him to the kitchen, where he began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. Fresh vegetables that had clearly come from his own garden. Eggs from what I assumed were his own chickens. Herbs that probably grew right outside the back door. "Can I help?" I asked. He looked surprised. "You cook?" "I can manage not to burn water," I said. "Usually." So we cooked together, and it was... than it should have been with a stranger. He moved around the kitchen with the same quiet confidence he'd shown with my car, while I chopped vegetables and tried not to think about how long it had been since I'd cooked anything that didn't come from a takeout container. "So," said as we worked. "Ethan what?" "Anderson," he said. "Ethan Anderson. And you're Emma." "Reynolds," I said. "Emma Reynolds, stranded city girl." "Well, Emma Reynolds," he said, and I loved the way my name sounded in his voice. "Welcome to Miller's Creek." Dinner was simple: pasta with fresh vegetables, a salad made from greens that had been growing in the ground that morning, and bread that he'd apparently baked himself. We ate on the back porch as the sun set behind the pastures, and I couldn't remember the last time food had tasted so good. "This is incredible," I said, twirling pasta around my fork. "Do you always eat like this?" "When you grow your own food, you tend to eat better," he said. "What do you usually eat in the city?" I thought about my typical diet of coffee, protein bars, and whatever I could order to my office. Sadness. Mostly, I admitted, making him laugh. "Well, we can't have that, As the stars came out, more stars than I'd ever seen in my life, we talked. Really talked, in a way I realized I hadn't done in years. He told me about taking over the farm after his grandfather died, about the challenges of keeping a small operation profitable, about his love for the land that went deeper than economics or logic. I found myself telling him things I'd never told anyone, about the pressure I felt to constantly achieve more, about how lonely it was to always be on, about how I sometimes felt like I was playing a role rather than living a life. "Why marketing?" he asked. "Because I'm good at it," I said automatically, then paused. "Actually, because my father told me I'd be good at it. He's a marketing executive too. Very successful. But what did you want to do?" The question caught me off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked me what I wanted? "I wanted to be a writer," I said quietly. "I used to write stories all the time when I was kid. Made up worlds. Characters who felt more real to me than most actual people. What happened to that? Life happened. Reality happened. You can't make a living writing stories. Can't you?" The way he asked it, so simply, made me realize how many assumptions I'd been carrying around without ever questioning them. We stayed up talking until nearly midnight, and when I finally went upstairs to the guest room, I felt more awake than I had in months. I lay in that comfortable bed, listening to sounds I never heard in the city. Crickets, the wind in the trees, the distant sound of an owl. I should have been thinking about getting back to work, about the emails piling up in my inbox. Instead, I found myself thinking about the way Ethan's eyes crinkled when he smiled, and how his hands had looked so sure and gentle when he'd served dinner. I woke up to the sound of a rooster crowing and sunlight streaming through curtains I'd forgotten to close. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The broken car, the stranger with green eyes, the most peaceful evening I'd had in years. I could smell coffee brewing downstairs, along with something that smelled like heaven. When I made my way to the kitchen, I found Ethan at the stove, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, flipping what looked like the most perfect pancakes I'd ever seen. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in months," I admitted. "What time is it?" "About 7. In my normal life, I would have been awake for 2 hours already, checking emails and preparing for my day. Here, 7 a.m. felt leisurely, peaceful. "I usually do the morning chores around now," Ethan said, sliding pancakes onto a plate. "You're welcome to come along, if you want, or you can stay here and relax." "What kind of chores?" "Feeding the animals, collecting eggs, checking on the gardens." Nothing too exciting, but something about the way he said it made it sound like the most interesting thing in the world. "I'd like to come," I said. "In those clothes?" He gestured to my borrowed jeans and sneakers. "What's wrong with these clothes?" He grinned. "Nothing, if you don't mind getting them dirty." I'd never collected eggs before. I'd never fed chickens or helped move hay or walked through vegetable gardens checking for pests. I'd certainly never mucked out horse stalls, but there was something almost meditative about the work, something satisfying about taking care of living things, about being part of a cycle that went back generations. "You're a natural," Ethan said, as I successfully convinced a particularly stubborn hen to give up her eggs. "I think she's just being polite to a guest," I said, but I was ridiculously pleased by the compliment. We worked together for about 2 hours, and by the end of it, I was sweaty, dirty, and happier than I'd been in months. When we went back to the house for a real breakfast, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. My hair was escaping from its ponytail. I had dirt on my face, and my borrowed clothes were definitely no longer clean. I looked. "So what's the plan for today?" I asked over breakfast. Those incredible pancakes topped with syrup that Ethan said came from his neighbor's maple trees. "Well, Jake won't be back until Monday to look at your car," Ethan said. "So I guess you're stuck with me until then." Stuck was definitely not the word I would have used. "I need to go to the farmer's market this morning," he continued. "Sell this week's produce. You could come along if you want, or I could drop you at Jenny's diner." "Farmer's market sounds interesting," I said. What I didn't say was that the thought of spending the day away from him felt strangely disappointing. The farmer's market was set up in the town square, a collection of white tents and folding tables where local farmers and artisans sold their goods. It was nothing like the sleek grocery stores I was used to, but there was something magical about buying tomatoes from the person who grew them, about tasting honey while the beekeeper told you about his hives. I helped Ethan set up his booth, arranging vegetables and herbs in displays that he somehow made look artful despite having no apparent design training. I watched him interact with customers, the easy familiarity, the way he knew everyone's names and asked about their families. This was community in a way I'd never experienced it. "Who's your helper?" asked an elderly woman buying lettuce. "This is Emma," Ethan said. "She's visiting from the city." "Well, aren't you pretty?" the woman said to me. "How are you liking our little town?" "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "Very different from what I'm used to." "I bet it is." "You staying long?" I glanced at Ethan. "Just until my car gets fixed." But even as I said it, something inside me was already dreading Monday. By noon, we'd sold almost everything Ethan had brought. I was amazed at how much work went into producing what seemed like such simple things. The care required to grow perfect tomatoes. The attention needed to raise herbs that actually had flavor. "This is your full-time job?" I asked as we packed up the empty crates. "This and the CSA boxes we deliver to families in the area," he said. "Plus some direct sales to restaurants. It's not making me rich money, but it's enough." "Don't you want more?" He paused in his packing. "More what?" "I don't know. More success? Recognition? Money? I have land that's been in my family for 3 generations. I grow food that feeds people. I know my neighbors, and they know me. My work makes the world a little bit better." And he looked at me seriously. What more could I want? It was such a different definition of success than anything I'd ever considered, as in my world, success was climbing ladders, earning more, achieving recognition from people you'd never met. But listening to Ethan talk about his life, I wondered if maybe I'd been climbing the wrong ladder entirely. We spent the afternoon exploring the area. Ethan showed me hidden swimming holes, hiking trails that led to breathtaking views, an old covered bridge where he'd carved his initials as a teenager. With each hour, I felt the knot of constant stress that I'd been carrying for months slowly unraveling. "This place is like a different world," I said as we sat by a creek, our feet dangling in the cold water. "It's not different," Ethan said. "It's just slower, quieter. Real, real," I repeated. "I'm not sure I remember what that feels like anymore." He turned to look at me, and there was something in his expression that made my heart skip. "You're real here," he said quietly. The air between us suddenly felt charged with something I hadn't felt in years, not the calculated attraction of my dating life in the city, but something deeper, more dangerous, something that felt like it could change everything. "Emma," he said, and my name on his lips sounded like a question and an answer all at once. I don't know who moved first. Maybe we both did. But suddenly his hand was cupping my face, and mine was tangled in his hair, and we were kissing like we'd been waiting our whole lives for this moment. He tasted like summer and possibility, like everything I hadn't known I was missing. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, I felt like I was seeing the world in color for the first time. "I should probably mention," I said, trying to catch my breath, "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing." "With kissing?" he asked, grinning. "With any of this. This isn't my life, Tomorrow I'll go back to Manhattan, and this will all feel like a dream." "It doesn't have to be a dream," he said, but even as he said it, I could feel reality creeping back in. My job, my apartment, my entire carefully constructed life waiting for me. The impossibility of what he was suggesting. "Ethan." "I know," he said. "I know it's crazy. I know we just met. But when I look at you, I see." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I see someone who's been sleepwalking through her life, and I want to help you wake up." His words hit me like a physical blow because they were so true it hurt. I had been sleepwalking, going through the motions of a life that looked successful on paper, but felt empty in practice. That evening, we cooked dinner together again. But the easy companionship of the night before was undercut with tension. The electric awareness of what had passed between us. The unspoken question of what it meant. "Tell me about your family," I said, as we chopped vegetables, desperate to break the tension. Something shuddered in his expression. "Not much to tell, just me now. Your sister in California. Sarah, she's a pediatric nurse, married to a good guy, has 2 kids I've never met." There was loneliness in his voice that made my heart ache. "Never met them?" "Hard to leave the farm, especially during growing season, and California feels like another planet." "What about your parents?" His hands stilled on the cutting board. "They died in a car accident when I was 22. Sarah was only 19. She wanted to go to college, have a career, see the world. I couldn't ask her to stay and help run this place. So you've been alone here for 8 years. 8 years. 8 years of running this place by himself, of maintaining family traditions with no one to share them with. I thought about my own family, my demanding father, my social climbing mother, the way Sunday dinners felt more like performance evaluations than family time. But at least I had them. Don't you get lonely? Sometimes, he admitted. But the land keeps you busy, and there's something to be said for solitude. Something to be said for connection, too, I said quietly. He looked up at me then, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid me. Yeah, he said, there is. After dinner, we sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance across the yard. The swing was built for two, which meant we sat close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, could smell his soap, and the lingering scent of the outdoors that seemed to cling to him always. Emma, he said finally, I need to ask you something. Okay. Oh? That life you described in the city, the one that sounds like a performance, is that what you want? Really want? I was quiet for a long time, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of his neighbor's cattle. 2 days ago, I would have said yes without hesitation, I said finally. Now. Honestly, don't know. What if you stayed? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Stayed here? Why not? You could write those stories you talked about. You could be part of something real. Ethan, I can't just abandon my entire life on a whim. Why not? Because, I struggled to find words that would explain the impossibility of what he was suggesting. Because I have responsibilities, a career, a lease on an apartment, student loans that won't pay themselves. Those are all just things, he said. They're not your life. Yes, they are. That's exactly what they are. My life. Then maybe it's time for a new life. The simplicity with which he said it, like changing your entire existence was as easy as choosing what to have for breakfast, was both appealing and terrifying. I can't, I said. I'm sorry, but I can't. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said finally. I know it's not fair of me to ask. I've never met anyone like you. Emma, thought of you going back to that life that makes you miserable. What makes you think I'm miserable? Because when you talk about your job, you sound like you're reciting a script. When you talk about your apartment, there's no warmth in your voice, Bon. When you mention your ex-boyfriend, you sound relieved rather than heartbroken. He turned to face me fully. But when you collected eggs this morning, when you helped at the market, when you're just sitting here talking to me, you're lit up from the inside. I wanted to argue with him, to defend the life I'd worked so hard to build, but the truth was, he was right. I was more myself in this borrowed life than I'd been in years of my real one. It's not that simple, I said. It could be. No, it couldn't. This is fantasy. Ethan, this is a weekend escape from reality. Real life is messier and more complicated, and it doesn't care about what we want. So what are you saying? I took a deep breath. I'm saying that Monday morning, I'm getting my car fixed and driving back to Manhattan, and we're going to pretend this never happened. The words felt like glass in my throat, but I forced them out anyway. Because the alternative, considering that maybe he was right, maybe I could just walk away from everything I'd built, was too terrifying to contemplate. Ethan was quiet for a long time. "If that's what you want," he said finally, "it's what has to happen. Those aren't the same thing." No, they weren't. But sometimes what had to happen and what you wanted were mutually exclusive. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself I was making the right choice. Through the window, I could see stars that were invisible from my Manhattan apartment, could hear the sounds of a world that went on existing, even when the stock market closed and the office buildings emptied. I thought about what Ethan had said about me being real here. The truth was, I felt more like myself in this place than I had in years. But feeling like yourself and being able to sustain a life were two different things. I had commitments, responsibilities, a career I'd worked years to build. I couldn't just walk away from all of that for a man I'd known for 3 days, no matter how he made me feel. Could I? Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. Ethan was quieter than he'd been the previous days, but still unfailingly kind. We did the morning chores together in companionable silence, and I tried to memorize everything. The way the chickens clucked at me like old friends, the satisfaction of pulling weeds from the vegetable garden, the peaceful contentment of working with my hands. "I should call a cab for tomorrow," I said over lunch, "to take me to the auto shop." "I can drive you," Ethan said. "You don't have to do that." "I want to." The simple statement carried so much weight. He wanted to drive me to my car so I could leave him. The generous impulse to make my abandonment of him easier was so characteristic of everything I'd learned about him that it made my chest ache. "Ethan." "It's okay," he said. "Understand. I do. Just wish." "What?" "I wish you trusted yourself enough to take a chance." It's not about trust. It's about being practical, responsible. Sometimes being too responsible means being irresponsible to your own happiness. I wanted to argue with him, but I couldn't find the words, because deep down, I was starting to suspect he might be right. That afternoon, it stopped raining, and Ethan suggested we take one last walk around the property. We followed a path I hadn't seen before, winding through woods that eventually opened up onto a hilltop with a view that took my breath away. Rolling hills stretched out in every direction, dotted with farms and forests and the occasional church steeple. It was like something out of a painting. "This is where I come when I need to think," Ethan said. "When the world feels too big or too complicated, it's beautiful. My grandfather used to bring me up here when I was a kid. He'd tell me stories about the people who farmed this land before us, about how every generation has to figure out how to make their own way while honoring what came before." I could hear the love in his voice, the deep connection to this place that went beyond ownership or economics. It was the kind of rootedness I'd never experienced, the sense of belonging somewhere completely. "I envy you," I said. "Why?" "You know who you are. You know where you belong. You're connected to something bigger than yourself. So could you be It's not that easy. Why not? Because I'm not you. The words came out louder than I'd intended, with a force that surprised both of us. I'm not someone who can just walk away from everything I've built and start over. I'm not brave enough for that kind of leap. You're the bravest person I've ever met, Ethan said quietly. What? No, I'm not. I'm practical and cautious, and you're brave, he repeated. You came here alone. You jumped into farm work you'd never done before. You opened up to a stranger about things you'd never told anyone. You're brave. Emma, you just don't trust yourself enough to see it. His words hit me like a revelation. Whoa. Was I brave? I'd never thought of myself that way. In my world, I was the responsible one, the careful one, the one who weighed all the options and made sensible choices. But maybe there was another way to live. Even if you're right, I said. Even if I wanted to stay, I couldn't just. What would I do here? How would I make a living? You could write. Writing doesn't pay the bills. Some writing does. And there are other ways to make a living. You could teach. You could work remotely. You could help me with the farm and the business side of things. God knows I could use someone with your marketing background. He'd clearly thought about this, which both thrilled and terrified me. You've got this all figured out, don't you? I've got the beginning figured out. The rest we'd figure out together. Together. The word hung between us like a promise and a threat. The idea of building something with someone, of being part of a partnership that was about more than just career advancement or social status, was so appealing, it scared me. I can't, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. You can't, or you won't. Both. Neither. I don't know. I was frustrated with myself, with him, with the impossible situation. This is crazy. Ethan. We've known each other for 3 days. Sometimes 3 days is enough. For what? To know that someone changes everything. The certainty in his voice, the complete absence of doubt, made me want to cry. When was the last time I'd been certain about anything? When had I last made a decision based on what I wanted, rather than what I thought I should want? What if it doesn't work? I asked. What if I give up everything and we crash and burn? What if it does work? What if this is the beginning of the life you were meant to have? And what if it's just a beautiful fantasy that falls apart as soon as reality sets in? Then at least you'll know you tried. We stood there on that hilltop, looking out over a landscape that felt like something out of a dream, and I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. Not just between two places, but between two completely different ways of being in the world. I need time to think, I said finally. How much time? I don't know. Maybe I could extend my stay a few days, take some vacation time and really think about this. Hope flickered in his eyes. Really? Really. But no pressure, okay? No more trying to convince me. I need to figure this out for myself. Fair enough. That evening, I called my assistant and arranged to work remotely for the rest of the week. I called my best friend Sarah and told her I was extending my trip, leaving out the part about the man who was making me question everything I thought I knew about myself. my mother and endured 20 minutes of lectures about responsibility and sensible choices, so I did not call my father. Monday morning, Ethan drove me to the auto shop as promised. Jake, the mechanic, turned out to be a cheerful man in his 40s who confirmed that my radiator was indeed dead and would need to be replaced. "How long?" I asked. "Part won't be here until Thursday, earliest." "You sure this is worth fixing? Car's getting up there in years." I looked at my BMW, which had seemed like such a symbol of success when I'd bought it, and realized I felt absolutely nothing for it. It was just a thing, just a means of transportation that had happened to break down at exactly the right moment. "Fix it," I said. "I'll be staying until it's ready." Ethan smiled at that, and I felt my heart skip in response. The rest of that week passed in a blur of perfect moments. We fell into a routine that felt both new and ancient. Morning chores together, afternoons working in the garden or exploring the countryside, evenings cooking dinner and talking until the stars came out. I helped him with the business side of the farm, using my marketing skills to design a better website and develop a social media strategy. He taught me to milk the goat, harder than it looks, to identify edible plants in the wild, to read the signs that indicated when vegetables were perfectly ripe. Each day, I felt a little more rooted, a little more like the person I was meant to be. I started writing again, just little things at first, observations about farm life and the way the light looked different here than in the city. But then I found myself working on a story, something that felt important and true in a way my marketing copy never had. "What are you writing about?" Ethan asked one evening, finding me on the porch with my laptop. "A woman who gets lost," I said, "and finds herself in the last place she expected to look." Sounds like a good story. It might be. Thursday came too soon. My car was fixed, gleaming in the mechanic's lot like an alien spacecraft that had landed in the wrong world. I stood looking at it, keys in my hand, and felt absolutely no desire to get inside. "So," Ethan said quietly, "what now?" I turned to look at him. This man who had become so important to me so quickly, who represented a life I'd never imagined wanting, but now couldn't imagine living without. "Now I make the scariest decision of my life," I said. "Which is?" I took a deep breath. "I'm staying." The smile that spread across his face was worth every comfortable certainty I was giving up. "Are you sure?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm terrified. I'm probably making the biggest mistake of my life. But I'm also probably making the best decision of my life, and I'd rather regret taking a chance than regret playing it safe." He kissed me then, right there in the auto shop parking lot, while Jake pretended not to watch, and I felt my old life fall away like a coat I'd finally outgrown. But of course, that wasn't the end of the story. That was just the beginning of the really hard part. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of phone calls and logistics. I had to quit my job, which went about as badly as expected, break my lease, expensive but worth it, and figure out how to extract myself from a life I'd spent years building. My assistant packed up my apartment and shipped my belongings, though I was amazed by how little of my city life I actually wanted to keep. The reaction from my family was explosive. "Have you lost your mind?" my mother demanded during a particularly painful phone call. "You have a career, a reputation, a future." "I'm 32, Mom." "I can build a new future. With some farmer you've known for 2 weeks? Emma, this is a midlife crisis, not a love story. I'm not having a midlife crisis. I'm having a life. Don't be dramatic. This is clearly a reaction to Marcus cheating on you. You're rebounding with the first man who paid attention to you. That stung. Partly because I'd wondered the same thing myself, but I knew it was more than that. Marcus had never made me feel the way Ethan did, like I was someone worth knowing, someone worth keeping. My father's reaction was somehow worse. He didn't yell or lecture. He just sounded disappointed, which had always been my greatest fear. I thought I raised you to be smarter than this, he said quietly, to make decisions based on logic rather than emotion. Maybe emotion isn't always wrong, I said. It is when it costs you everything you've worked for. What if what I've worked for isn't worth keeping? He was silent for a long moment. Then I don't know who you are anymore. The words hit me like a physical blow, but later, thinking about it, I realized that maybe that was the point. Maybe I didn't know who I was anymore either. Maybe that wasn't a bad thing. The hardest call was to my best friend Sarah. I'm worried about you, she said after I explained what I was doing. This isn't like you. You don't make impulsive decisions, Chong. Maybe that's been the problem. Or maybe you're having some kind of breakdown. When's the last time you talked to Dr. Martinez? Dr. Martinez was my therapist, the one who'd suggested I take this trip in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'm not having a breakdown, I said. I'm having a breakthrough. Same thing. Sometimes. Maybe she was right. Maybe the difference between a breakdown and a breakthrough was just perspective. But even with all the doubts and fears and family disapproval, I knew I was making the right choice. I knew it when I woke up every morning to the sound of roosters instead of traffic. I knew it when Ethan brought me coffee in bed and kissed my forehead like I was precious. I knew it when I spent afternoons writing stories that mattered to me, working in gardens that fed people, being part of a community that actually functioned like a community. 3 months after my car broke down on that country road, I submitted my first freelance article to a magazine about sustainable living. 6 months later, I sold my first short story. A year later, I had a book deal for a collection of essays about city people finding themselves in rural places. But the real transformation wasn't professional. It was personal. I learned to trust my instincts, to make decisions based on what felt right rather than what looked right on paper. I learned that love wasn't something you had to earn through achievements, but something you could simply accept and give freely. I learned that home wasn't a place you bought or rented, but something you built with another person, day by day, choice by choice. Ethan and I didn't have a fairy tale romance. We had something better, a real relationship built on shared work, honest communication, and the daily choice to keep choosing each other. We fought about money and chores and whose turn it was to deal with the stubborn goat. We struggled through bad harvests and family tensions, and the inevitable moments when the gap between our backgrounds felt impossible to bridge. But we also had mornings when we'd walk through the gardens together, planning the season's plantings. We had evenings when we'd sit on the porch swing, reading our books in comfortable silence. We had nights when we'd lie in bed talking about everything and nothing, feeling like the luckiest people alive. 2 years after that first weekend, Ethan proposed to me in the same spot where he'd first kissed me, by the creek where I'd first started to understand what my life could be. I said yes before he finished asking the question. We had a small wedding in the backyard, with flowers from our own gardens and food we'd grown ourselves. My parents came, though my mother spent most of the reception asking when I was planning to come to my senses and move back to civilization. Sarah was my maid of honor, and by the end of the weekend, she was asking if I knew any other farmers who might be looking for a wife. "You look happy," she said, as we watched Ethan dance with his sister, who'd flown in from California with her family. "I am happy," I said. "Genuinely, completely happy." "I owe you an apology," she said. "I thought you were making a huge mistake." Maybe I was. Maybe the best mistakes are the ones that turn out not to be mistakes at all. Now, 5 years later, I'm sitting on that same porch swing where we used to talk until the stars came out, watching my husband work in the garden while our 2-year-old daughter helped by watering the plants with a toy watering can. Our son is napping upstairs, and I'm stealing a few minutes to work on my latest book, a novel this time, about a woman who learns that sometimes the best way to find yourself is to get completely lost first. People ask me sometimes if I ever regret giving up my city life, my career, my carefully planned future. The answer is complicated, because regret implies that I think I made the wrong choice, and I know I didn't. But do I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed? Of course. Do I sometimes miss the energy and excitement of the city? Absolutely. Do I occasionally panic about the financial insecurity of being a freelance writer married to a small farmer? You bet. But then Ethan comes inside with dirt under his fingernails and sunshine in his hair, and he kisses me like I'm still the miracle he never expected to find. Our daughter runs up with a handful of cherry tomatoes she picked herself, chattering about the butterfly she saw in the garden. Our son wakes up from his nap and smiles like I'm the best thing he's ever seen. And I remember that security isn't about having a guaranteed salary or a 5-year plan. Security is about knowing who you are and trusting yourself enough to keep becoming who you're meant to be. Security is about building a life with someone who sees all of you, the ambitious city girl and the woman who finds peace in growing things and loves every version. The life I have now isn't the one I planned. It's messier, more uncertain, more dependent on weather and seasons and things I can't control. But it's also more authentic, more joyful, more connected to what actually matters. Sometimes the best love stories don't start with love at first sight. Sometimes they start with a broken-down car and a stranger willing to help. Sometimes they start with someone seeing who you really are underneath, who you think you're supposed to be. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they start with the courage to trust that the life you never imagined might be exactly the life you were meant to live. As I write this, the sun is setting behind our pastures, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that no city sunset could match. In a few minutes, Ethan will call us in for dinner, something simple made from things we grew ourselves. We'll eat together as a family, talking about our days and making plans for tomorrow. Later, after the kids are in bed, we'll sit on this porch swing and talk about everything and nothing, just like we did in those first magical days when the whole world seemed full of possibility. Because the truth is, it still does. Sometimes I think about that woman I used to be, the one who measured success in salary figures and job titles, who thought love was something you had to earn rather than something you could simply accept. I don't miss her, exactly, but I'm grateful to her. She worked hard to build a life that gave me the freedom to choose a different one. She climbed a ladder that taught her she'd rather be building something from the ground up. Most of all, she had the courage to get in that car and drive to a place where everything would change. The best love stories aren't about finding someone to complete you. They're about finding someone who inspires you to complete yourself. And the best life stories aren't about following the path you planned, but about having the wisdom to recognize when a better path appears. Mine appeared on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, offered by a stranger with green eyes and dirt under his fingernails, who saw something in me that I'd forgotten was there. And I've been grateful for that broken radiator every single day since.